Hello and welcome back to the God Theory Podcast. That's the second time I've done that, David. Our
Yeah.
podcast. We need to switch up these names, make them totally different. Like one starts with A, one starts with Z, so I don't do that. This is the God Theory Podcast, and thanks for tuning in. This week, as we alluded to, I believe last week and the week before, we have a special guest, Russell Glasser from the Atheist Experience. Actually, I'll let him do his own talking. Hey, Russell, how are you doing?
Hi there. I'm pretty good. How are you?
Good, good. And so, you want to tell people, if they haven't heard of you for some reason, then tell people a little bit about yourself.
Well, I host a show called The Atheist Experience. It's a live call-in TV show. It's on cable access TV, but the vast majority of our audience is from people watching online. And it's a call-in show. I think it is unique in the sheer number of actual Christian callers that we get who willingly call in and talk to us. I've also joined you one time before, I think last year, on the Game Theory podcast, that other one, and we were talking about David Serlin's book and philosophy of playing to win.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, because you're also a gamer.
Yes, big gamer. And I also work at a game company, but and I'm not really secret about it. You can look me up, but I won't say their name on the podcast.
Yes. I know you regularly stream. I missed an opportunity to stream with you a couple days ago or yesterday, but you regularly stream games on your Twitch channel.
Yeah, that's rglasser27 on Twitch.
Yeah, it's pretty good group. But great, yeah. So, David, how are you doing this week?
Oh, fantastic. I'm in the Bible Belt once again this summer, visiting the folks. So they are at church right now, so I've got the house to myself where all the blasphemy I can stand.
Hey, that's Mormon church. It's like 3 hours long.
Yeah.
So you live with churchgoers? Is that what you're saying?
I visit them over the summer.
Okay.
So a couple weeks every year I get to be back in the heart of Bible land.
Do they know about this podcast?
They do not know about this podcast.
Uh-oh.
This is not a. They know I do they know about the Game Theory podcast, but this is not one I feel like they would be in the target demographic for the audience. So I just did not plug it.
I understand that. You should drop that at a good, like a family dinner, maybe on like I don't know, Christmas or something.
Hey guys, you want to listen to my new show? It's called Fuck the Pope.
Well, of course, on the Atheist Experience, our primary demographic is people who hate us. We're hoping that more of them will see it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Usually when I listen to these call-in shows, the Christians don't like calling in. It's mostly other atheists, so it's fun to actually hear Christians jumping in on the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, I'm going to be in St. Louis in a couple weeks, right? You guys are sort of near there or not? No. I have my geography all wrong.
I'm currently sort of near there. I'm about 6 hours away right now.
That's not really near enough.
Well, it's a big country.
Yeah, that's right. You've been kind of flying around a little bit, giving talks recently, haven't you?
A little bit. I'm trying to do some more of it. So if anybody is watching who wants to invite me, I'm not one of the super expensive ones, and I do a lot of Secular Student Alliance stuff. So, hey.
That'd be good. I tried to get some conversations going down here in Mississippi to get some kind of motivation, but that Facebook page is just mostly dead. And,
that's too bad.
But fortunately, Neil Carter. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He posted on there a couple times.
I heard about him recently. I think he was coming to Dallas, but we didn't secure him for our show.
Oh.
Whatever. I don't know that much about him personally.
Now, I know, let me see, there's been like a recent kind of talk that you gave, I think, recently that I've been interested in. What was that one that you gave, I think, most recently?
Well, in Los Angeles, like last month, I gave a talk on actually playing to win. And I'm going to be doing that again at when I go back to St. Louis. I talked to the Secular Student Alliance at the St. Charles Community College last year about skepticism.
Just in general?
Just in general. It was kind of a, here's why you should be skeptical and here's how.
Man, That's good. It's been a little eye-opening to see how many people that are in the non-religious camp that kind of ascribe to these weird, kind of mysticism or spiritualism or psychic powers. Have you noticed that?
Oh, absolutely. And the thing I talked about last year was that people tend to say, what's the harm of believing something that makes you feel good? And as I demonstrated in a lot of different cases, there are a lot of situations where not being skeptical can get you in trouble in some ways. I mean, like, a lot of us are familiar with the mass emails that go out often from Nigeria that say, like, you've won the Nigerian lottery, or, hey, you have a long-lost relative who wants to give you money.
He contacted you too?
Yeah.
That bastard.
I'm totally going to get rich off that.
That's awesome.
But that stuff is serious business. I mean, they are trying to scam you, and in some cases, people have actually gone to Nigeria chasing this money they think that is coming to them, and they got killed.
Not the safest place to go.
Yeah. And also, what?
Oh, I was just going to say, I've noticed that some people, like, most people don't like being wrong, too, especially publicly. So you'd think there's that very real, threat of, looking like an idiot. So.
Sure, but I think they mistakenly try to minimize being wrong by fighting against the appearance of being wrong. And the form that often takes is just acting super confident and refusing to back down no matter what. And that really is the opposite of being skeptical. Like, if you are skeptical, the best thing you can do is always consider the very real possibility that you could be wrong at this very moment, and try to figure out how you could be wrong so you can minimize it and change your mind to something that's true.
Yeah, kind of like an intellectual humility.
Right.
It seems like that had its roots in a lot of the philosophy that we kind of started with Socrates.
Mm-hmm.
He would entertain the opposite position to the point where they would be agreeing with him. They're like, yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying, and then he'd decimate it.
Yeah.
That's cool. I think it's funny. Sometimes I think about, like, how if I could totally, like, redo. David, you're in teaching. If I could totally redo the education system, how I'd just personally, if I became the president of the United States and had $1 million power, whatever, I was over 9,000.
Because we all know what the actual president, how much influence the actual president has on people.
Yeah, exactly.
He can just make sweeping changes anytime he wants, and people will be like, "Oh yeah, he's the president, no problem," right?
Yeah, exactly. And those non-partial news sites just totally report regularly on it. It's not a big deal. But I think about that sometimes, and I think I would add in some kind of thing about obviously critical thinking in general, but even though I've met people that have had those classes in high school, at least, I know they teach those, but and it's almost like a little bit of, how they say, a little bit of philosophy or a little bit of anything is like dangerous. It just gets you in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
You get these people on both sides of the debate calling out fallacies and being like just skeptical enough to toss the burden of proof and then never going further. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean it's complicated. People can certainly, no matter where they're coming from, no matter what their position is, they can always fall into this trap of seeing their own points of view as infallible. Like on the religious side, you have people saying, well, there's a God, and the God agrees with me because I read it in the Bible, so I can't possibly be wrong. But on the other side, you have a lot of atheists who often say, like, well, I've rejected God, and so I'm so much smarter than everybody else that my logic and reason is shielding me from ever being wrong from now on. And like I said, that's an incredibly unskeptical position to take.
Huh.
I find education-wise, the best thing you can do is model it. Like, I teach French, which is mostly grammar, but I get to work philosophy into it. And you bring in your Descartes, your Voltaire, your Rousseau. It's all about, like, questioning authority. But then I'll do it in myself. Like, I was teaching them about how language changes how we view the world, and there was this story last year about how ancient peoples couldn't see the color blue. It was on a lot of, like,
I saw that, and I was like,
Yeah, and
Right.
and I was covering it with just going over it. I was like, oh, that's cool. It's really the language, and we talked about it and how that could be true. And then I did some more research, and I was like, oh wait, this is kind of bullshit. And so I come back the next day, and I'm like, hey, remember all the stuff I told you yesterday? I was wrong. I didn't fact check enough. I should have been more skeptical. And just saying that like it's okay to be wrong, like from an authority figure, I think that goes a long way for them.
Yeah, that's good. Now, I mean, one of the things I like education-wise, if I could toot the horn of my own profession, I think that learning to write computer programs is incredibly good for kids because, first of all, programming is pretty much about being wrong 90% of the time.
Yeah.
Because everything you do is like guaranteed to have bugs pretty much, or guaranteed not to do what you expected, or guaranteed to do what you expected, but it turns out that what you expected isn't the way you should have thought about the problem in the first place.
Huh.
And in order to not be wrong, you have to apply very, very rigorous logic to figuring out exactly why it's doing the wrong thing. I'm not saying that computer programmers are the smartest people in the world, but I'm saying that just as much as philosophy, I feel like some kind of logical or mathematical discipline is really helpful in helping you think right.
Yeah, that's a good point. It really is like a model of how, like, if I'm following you correctly, it's like whenever you write like a, oh man, I don't even know the language, a Google of code.
A Google.
Yes. Yes, a gaggle of code. Then
a gaggle of code. Yeah.
You throw it out there.
It's a murder of code.
Murder of code. Yeah. So you throw out a murder of code, and then you have to. Like that was your best guess, I take it, of how it should work, how the innards should like function. But then you really have this like moment of like you're forced into a moment of self-reflection, and you kind of slow successive approximations towards a flawless murder of code. Is that kind of how it works?
Kind of. I mean, it's really, there's some amount of it that's like detective work. Like you have to actually, because if you're working with a large code base that has like 1 million lines of code in it, let's say, you can't just read every line one by one and see which one is wrong. You have to actually narrow it down and figure out where to begin your search. And then there's like a combination of abstract thinking where you think about the problem and experimental thinking where you run the program and see if the change you made does what you think it does. I don't know how on topic this is for an atheist podcast. I'm descending into the wrong area of being.
But it's the same process. It's making a claim and then trying and then testing it. The only difference is you are forced to come face to face with your fallacies if it's a program, because you can't just wiggle out of it and be like, oh, it works, because that's how we get Batman Arkham Knight launches.
Yes, which, by the way, I haven't played Arkham Knight, but I've only just played Arkham Asylum Arkham Asylum and Arkham City for the first time.
Oh, so
Why
fun.
didn't anybody tell me they're so good? Actually, everybody told me they're so good. I just didn't listen.
The majority of the internet was right about something.
So are you planning on playing Origins before you play Knight?
I don't know. Should I?
I love it because Troy Baker, is the Joker.
I like Troy Baker.
Yeah, and then there's, it introduces a certain detective mode that
you just
really
spoiled
fun.
something for me. Oh wait, it's a prequel to City, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's how they meet. It's like their origin story.
All right, cool.
Spoilers: the Joker was alive at some point in the past.
Right.
But it's pretty good. As far as on topic goes, actually, did you have? I was pretty fascinated just by the analogy of, I've been interested in godless parenting in general, so I was excited about what you're talking about. But if you have something you'd like to talk about, I'm totally cool with that too.
Well, we can talk about parenting if you're interested. Although, I pretend like I know what I'm talking about a lot. Really, I have one kid, and he's competent. So I don't know how much that qualifies me. You're the psychologist.
Yeah. There's just not a lot of research on like I mean, there is on like a lot of like obviously behavioral things, but as far as like to instill morals that have like some longitudinal predictor for I don't know whatever altruism, we don't know that so much. So.
Well, I'm the kind of guy who likes to read a lot about what I'm doing. So I mean, if I get into a game, for instance, I'm all reading strategy and reading other people's discussion about how to play the game well. So naturally, when I had my kid, I started reading parent books, and I very quickly figured out that they're all over the place and nobody seems to have any idea what they're talking about. Like every book I read seems to be best guessed by somebody. I mean, I don't know if your experience has been the same or not.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I mostly look at mommy blogs for my research, so I like to get the credentials.
I wish that the problem is I think that as soon as someone gets a microphone, they want to give advice. So here, let me just give you some advice. No,
okay,
no. Yeah. I suffer from the same problem, but I think I try to take off my hat and say, all right, so this I have no idea about. I'm just guessing. I try to do that on a regular basis, but I think most people don't, and so I get pretty frustrated by like what you said, a lot of best guesses. But in psychology, a lot of our stuff is symptom reduction rather than like. There's a positive psychology movement, which is about improving quality of life, but a lot of our stuff is clinical. It's about helping people not be in a horrible place. So, yeah. Right.
Well, I mean, I've always enjoyed being around younger people. Like, I had a little sister, and I would talk a lot to freshmen when I was a senior in high school, and I did some teaching. When I came out of school, I did some programming classes, and I feel like I always wanted to approach parenting just like being a mentor, sort of, just being a good role model for somebody. Although, when you do have kids, the first thing you realize is that any fantasy you might have about them being a perfectly functioning person who just needs things explained to them goes right out the window. Am I right?
Yeah, pretty much.
I mean, kids eat dirt, and there's a certain point where you just have to be like, don't do that, shut up.
Yeah, it strikes me that like 60% of your time spent parenting is keeping them from killing themselves somehow.
Right. Yeah.
And then that 40% is where you get your mentoring in.
Yeah, exactly. And as an atheist and a skeptic, I feel like it's really important to guide somebody with a view in mind that your kid is one day going to have to apply the lessons that you've given them yourself. And so those because I said so lessons may keep them alive in the short term, but when you're not around to say so anymore, they have to have their own kind of mental framework for understanding things. And so I always think that like being skeptical and a critical thinker, like you said, is one of the most important early lessons that you can give a kid.
If I recall right, and you grew up in kind of a godless household. Was that correct?
Yeah, and that's unusual among atheists.
Yeah.
A lot of them.
I was wondering about that. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I mean, most atheists I know have some kind of conflict with their parents over it because most people in the United States are religious, and so most kids, if they're atheists, they had to come to that conclusion themselves, and it put them at odds with what their parents were telling them. And so there's kind of a rebellious core to atheist children often, which is not the same experience I had. For me, it was just like, my parents seemed smart, and I agreed with them.
Yeah. I think that's interesting. I was wondering if that gave you any insights as far as like, because there's a moment that happens, and I'm sure you've heard this a trillion times, but people who switch over the belief. There's a moment where you're like, well, shit, what do I stand for? I was just wondering if you guys did any like any moral work or like anything like that where you're like, I have a guiding principle I work by or a set of principles. Did you guys
Spider-Man Sunday school with like with great power comes great responsibility? You don't fall back to that.
My dad was really big on Bertrand Russell, and
wow,
I could prove that. Just look what my name is. And Bertrand Russell has a lot of philosophy about, like, he called it The Conquest of Happiness is one of his books, where he talked about the need to live a life that is good and satisfying, basically, and you accomplish a lot of things on your own terms. So I got a lot of that from my dad. Also, I mean, I did go to a lot of social activities with other kids that weren't church, but we were members of a Unitarian church for a little while, and we excuse me, we did hang out with a lot of really liberal Jews. I'm also from a Jewish background, even though my parents were pretty much completely secular about it. But yeah, I think as far as morality goes, the way atheists generally approach the problem is not so much because I said so, but like, what consequences will my actions have on the real world, and is that a world that is better off for having me around?
Yeah, I was kind of wondering about that. I remember I had a philosophy professor, one of them. The other one was very pragmatic, but one of them like kind of scoffed at the idea of like consequentialism, or that idea of like, people do things only with regard to these consequences. And I think, but as I've moved forward, and especially with behaviorism, obviously, I'm like, well, that's how we do things. We just trick ourselves otherwise. I was wondering if you guys did a lot of things like that, like. Yeah, if you guys talked explicitly about consequentialism or some moral kind of hypothetical construct that was higher.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember completely, but certainly when I talk about morality today, I'm pretty much consequentialist all the way. So I'm assuming I must have gotten some of that from my parents. Because if you're not worried about the consequences, then what's the point of having morality? Like. You hear Christians say, well, morals definitely come from God, and the purpose of morality is just to do what he told you to. But if you think about it, that doesn't really make any sense, because could God tell you to do any old thing and that would become moral? We're used to thinking of, let's say, rape as wrong. If a Christian sincerely believed that God told them to rape somebody, would they then decide, oh, well, okay, I guess I was wrong about rape?
Right. Are things just because the gods say they're just, or do the gods say they're just because they're just?
Yes, the Euthyphro dilemma, my favorite.
Yeah, we've been doing something I do in at least in marital therapy or couples therapy. I do. I always say right out of the gate, I'm like, you'll notice I will never use the words, or if I do, then catch me. But I will try to never use the words right and wrong, or like good and bad, because really I want to look at things functionally. Like, does this work for you? Does this not work for you?
Sure, because
yeah, but
because when you're doing couples counseling, you could be totally right, but you could, one side could be totally right, but in sticking to their ground, they could destroy the relationship. And maybe it's a relationship worth destroying, because I totally believe that divorce is a great thing.
The Louis C.K. school of divorce.
Yes. I actually love that quote by Louis C.K. He's like, you know why divorce is so expensive? Because it's so worth it.
Good marriages don't end in divorce.
But, I'm not saying that relationships are bad. I'm saying not all relationships are good and successful. And, if a relationship is bad, maybe it ought to end. But that is an extreme last resort measure, and so usually the real question when you're dealing with couples counseling is, what action should I make that is going to maximize the health of this relationship and my happiness, which are related.
Exactly, I was going to say those two are related. That's usually what I try to bring people back to, but I only brought up the couples counseling fact because of the idea of this a second order kind of concept of goodness. Goodness I assume describes a set of behaviors or gives you some guiding principle to behave a certain way, and I found myself using that like in parenting, but in a lot of things where I'll give this idea of goodness, or like I'll say a good boy, or like a good whatever, and then I'll assign those behaviors underneath that and consistently label that and reinforce those behaviors. I've just been wondering though how useful that is, because if I say good, then it gives like there's an imperative there, and then it feels like it's inflexible and not sensitive to context.
Well, going back to what I said earlier, or like what David said, parent is 60% making your kids not kill themselves. And I think a certain amount of parental authority is reasonable, and that goes not only for not killing themselves, but like, oh, hey, you stole a pack of gum. You can't do that. I'll tell you why later, but for now, here's what we're going to do. We're going to drive back to the store, and you're going to give that pack of gum to the cashier and tell him you took it and you're sorry. And those lessons, I think, will, and I have definitely been through that experience as a kid. Of being super humiliated in order to drive home a lesson about something you can't do, and that kind of reinforces the overall philosophy later of why. And I think as kids grow up, you can certainly transition towards a much more because I said so model. Away from that and towards a more philosophical model of trying to get the kid to agree with your overall reasons for being good.
Right. There's like that cognitive development that children go through where they start off where they can only handle black and white thinking, basically. Like they have good guys and bad guys, and everything has agency, and clouds are alive. And they just can't handle like categorical imperatives and like high-level philosophy at that age. So it's almost... Yeah. It's almost like religion kind of keeps you in an arrested development sort of stage where you just never move past that to a more nuanced, functional way of thinking.
Yeah, because religion is all about the because I said so model, and they never want you to get off of that and ask, well, why did God say that this is good? They're like, what are you talking about? He said so. Like, I have barely ever heard any atheist make a coherent reason why, let's say, gay marriage is wrong.
Yeah. It's hard to do.
And that's one example where culture until now has pretty much accepted unquestioningly that they should outlaw something, but the reasons are never much more coherent than because the Bible says so or because it's gross.
Well, because dogs and cats will get married. You forgot. Well, it's a slippery slope.
Yeah, I like that idea that the church is serving a proxy of like an adult in a child's life, because honestly the government used to do that too. Not more. I was in the intelligence community, so I know all the shady shit we did, but like also a lot of that has come to light recently just because of like WikiLeaks and Snowden and stuff. They want to be able to tell you good and bad and give you that and expect you to act on those black and white thinking. I was in the military as well. Right. Same thing. Shoot that bad guy. So it's interesting.
Yeah, and I think there's a constant push and pull in history of governments trying to strike the right balance, because ultimately the purpose of having a government is to make the lives of the citizens better in some way. And like we have a military, for instance, because ostensibly, if we didn't have a military, there's one level where you have a military and then you go kill the other guys in the next county over and you take their stuff. But if you're not the kind of person who wants to do that, you still have to set up a military that will stop the other guys from coming in and taking your stuff.
Yeah.
It's that notion of collectivizing to take some action that, like, because if an army is coming to take my stuff, me and my AK-47 alone are not going to really do much about that. Sorry to go straight for the violent applications of government. But what I was trying to say was some amount of government is necessary, but then you can swing too far in the extreme of the the government just saying, well, from now on, I said that the law is this. You give me 90% of your taxes, and you get nothing of your income as taxes, and you get nothing because I'm the king. And then you have a King Joffrey.
Yeah. God bless him.
Right.
Yeah. May the Seven bless him.
May the Seven watch over him.
Seven. Yes. And in the other direction, there's a government that is too lenient and has no teeth and can't actually enforce any laws, like, let's say, Reddit.
Yeah, yes.
It's the Wild West.
Where all sorts of horrible things happen because there's no enforcement of anything.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, an assumption of... Well, anyway, that gets onto a whole different topic. I guess we don't really have. We're meandering anyway. But I was thinking about the the idea of Thomas Hobbes versus what was the other guy? Remember, there's one who assumes all people are evil.
Oh.
And then the other one says people are inherently good.
I think Hobbes was the all people are evil guy.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's Locke.
He was writing against. Oh, okay.
Maybe.
I feel like it might have been someone's, but anyway, the essential question of people are inherently evil or people are inherently good. Does government, is government supposed to give people liberation in their way of, acting and allow them to act on those good impulses, or is it there to restrain people from their basal nature?
But I don't think people are inherently evil or inherently good. I mean, people are just people, and we all want to maximize our lives, and absolute good and evil are in some way simplified theistic concepts. And you have to accept the fact that there will be evil people who don't fit the model of what you're trying to do, and figure out how to get everyone to coexist, even if coexist means, well, we take a small percent of the population and we put them in jail.
I thought you were going to say decimate them like the Romans. I was like, geez.
Yeah,
no. Decimation. Yeah, no, right. I think we all want our best interest, right? And I think the more you learn and the smarter you are and just the more exposure you have to systems, the more you realize that your best interest lies in making other people's lives better too. It's a pro-social kind of functionality.
Yeah,
so are people good or evil? I don't know, but I think everybody's out for them, to improve themselves, and the smart people have figured out they do that by helping others.
Right. You gotta be good at negotiating. That's part of being human. We're not really good at killing people, but we're good at. We're not as good at just like killing something with our bare hands, for instance, and we don't run as fast. But we're really good at talking to achieve an outcome. Right. So, since we're all gamers here, like and all kind of into multiplayer games, I think it's worth noting that in a lot of cases, having that diplomatic impulse can often take you a long way in multiplayer games, like for instance, Heroes of the Storm, which we all play.
Yeah.
Has a lot of angry people in it some of the time.
And they're going to be terrible when they log in, and the first thing they say is, I hope you guys don't suck, because my last team all sucked. And we're like, that's probably what happened. Oh, no, this guy's going to be the worst.
Right, and when that guy introduces himself that way, it's like, this guy is not playing well in terms of trying to get his team to win. Like, he's obviously frustrated that he didn't win the last game, but if you make the rest of your teammates around you angry and defensive right away, that is not going to put them in a frame of mind to win. So like, a lot of times the ability to win a game, and I've felt personally responsible for victories this way, is somebody comes in angry and I'm like, hey man, settle down. We all want to win here, and what can we do together? And just get everybody sort of on the same side instead of trying to sabotage each other.
Yeah, actually, I give this. There's a talk that I've given academically a few times to corporations about. It's called. I've changed the title a couple times. So essentially, it's How to Be an Evil Bastard, and it's really called effective communication. If I'm talking to the higher ups that have no sense of humor, but if I'm talking to the regular staff that they want to be trained up, I say How to Be an Evil Bastard, and get away with it is my subtitle. And really, it's it's one of these questions of who's the most evil person, and to use another nerdy analog, Game of Thrones. Is it Tywin Lannister or is it Littlefinger? And I submit that it's Littlefinger or Varys, because if you are kind, well, it's not it's
I think
more Littlefinger.
Yeah, I think Varys is actually one of the most good characters in the whole series.
Yeah, and so that would be a good person using the same sort of thing. So actually, Littlefinger's the greatest, because what you do is to your opponent is you sort of pet their ego, or you know what I say is over listen. You sum up everything they've said, and you hold it lightly. You know, you say, oh, so okay, so you have a great problem with me right now. Like, I use an example of you guys are probably bored sitting in your chairs, and you probably want to tell me, shut up, get to the point, right? And if you said that, here's how I would respond. And sometimes I try to make him say it, but then I say, okay, so you're coming in here after a long day of work. You're probably not even getting paid for this. This is something you don't have to do, but you do have to do it because your boss said so. You think this isn't worth it. I totally get that. I wouldn't want to be here either if I were you. You empathize with them, you validate it, and then you submit it. And the reason why is because otherwise you're going to activate that lizard brain. And once you get that going with the emotional, you got circuitry, the way that works is that we have a very difficult time getting any blood flow to the frontal lobes to understand the other person's argument. So what I do is I constantly soothe that, lizard brain by empathizing and validating. So the most evil person in the world would be also kind if he was smart.
Yeah, I mean, Littlefinger, the thing about him is that he's really, really effective. Like, he knows what he wants, but he doesn't, necessarily tell people up front, here's how I'm feeling and here's what I'm going to do. He does what is most useful for influencing other people to do what he wants and not be suspicious of him as much as possible. Whereas, he is the exact polar opposite of Ned Stark, who has really good intentions at heart, but he really totally wears his heart on his sleeve. He thinks way too much about what is, what should I do that is right now, and doesn't have any long-term strategizing ability. He doesn't predict what other people are going to do.
Yeah, he's the John McCain and Littlefinger's Hillary Clinton. Not a perfect analog, and also I should preface that by saying I don't follow politics.
I don't know. Hillary Clinton lost the last election, lost the nomination last time around. So apparently she got outplayed by Barack Obama.
True mastermind.
I love politics because I think of politics in those same terms. I have this set of things that I think would be right as far as what our government should be like, but then I'm always asking who is doing the best job of making sure that this is actually going to get implemented in some way, because you can have all the right opinions but just be terrible at your job.
Yeah. And I like the difference between being right and being effective, because you can see that in Heroes of the Storm. You might decide the great call right now is go attack giants, and you're clicking on it, and everybody else is going to go push a tower or something, and that's not the right call, but it's more effective to go with the other team than to go try and take the giants by yourself. So you can stubbornly, Ned Stark, your way over to the giants, or you can just do what's more effective.
Yeah, so there's a rule that I read somewhere that if your team is being stupid, then go be stupid with them.
Yes.
Yeah. Because, you can do what you think is right and have a guaranteed loss, or you can do some crazy all-in at the wrong place. Well, at least you're all going to be there, so there's a small chance that the stupid thing you do will work.
Yeah, and that's what's unique about that game compared to other MOBAs is, in League of Legends, for example, if you ever played that, you can kind of do your own thing. You can be a lane all-star, and you're high enough level because you're doing so well that you can actually somehow pull it off. But Heroes really forces that teamwork aspect. So I think it's a good laboratory for this kind of pro-social model.
Yeah, it is sort of to pick another game, Left 4 Dead. I always loved very much because unlike other shooters, you will actively be punished for not working cohesively with other players on your team. It's not just that you will be a little marginally less effective if you're not doing teamwork. It's if you say, well, screw you guys, I know where the exit is, I'm running straight there, you're going to get pounced by a hunter and you're dead because your team's not with you.
Yeah.
I really love those kind of games where there is an enforced team aspect to them because it is a lot like real life.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah, exactly, and I think it's a certain perspective too. If you're taking into like the future, then you're going to be less likely to obsess over battles and more think about the war. Like when you do go with your team, to like I don't know, turn in 2 coins when you need 10, in the middle of the map, and you're like, this is so stupid. You go to do it, but like you still have a chance that they'll follow your ping later. And now if you act like a dick, and I'm like, no, I need to push back mid. Obviously, it's taking our tower. I'll say that, but if they don't go with me and I'm like, well, I'm just going to get jumped if I try to do that, then I just go with them and then I try to ping again. And when they start following my advice, then, people kind of get it usually that, oh, wait, this guy actually knows what he's talking about. He's telling us to do things that make sense, or at least that have worked for me. Yeah. So you have a chance if you submit.
Let me clumsily bring this back around to atheism for a minute. Atheism is like an unpopular point of view for people to take. So if the goal is to convince people that atheism is correct, then you're already fighting an uphill battle because a lot of people just assume that there's a God because they've been taught that way all their lives. And a lot of atheists and a lot of scientists, let's say, like for instance, evolution is accepted science. It is, there's a strong consensus among people who studied it that it definitely happened, and we have a pretty good understanding of the mechanisms. But a lot of debates I see with scientists on one side trying to defend evolution or global climate change or some other unpopular but accurate scientific opinion will clearly be going in with the attitude, well, what I'm saying is true, so obviously people just have to hear me say it, and then they'll be like, oh, obviously, that's right. And that is very often a losing game strategy. That is the Ned Stark way to play.
Yeah.
Whereas, Christian debaters that I hear are often very adept at making appeals to emotion and ridiculing the other side, and sort of what we might consider underhanded rhetorical tricks. But they do that, well, first of all, because if they were going to rely on the truth, then they'd just give it up, because there is no particularly factual basis to religion. So I mean, having the rhetorical tricks is most of what they've got to work with. But also they use it because it's effective and it works. And I think, a winning attitude when it comes to making your case for atheism really requires you to listen to what people you disagree with use tactically and try to borrow the most effective practices yourself.
Huh. So do you mean to use appeals to emotion and that kind of thing?
Yeah, like, I mean, for instance, an example would be how religious people use atheist as a dirty word, or conservatives use liberal as a dirty word, and they'll be like, well, atheists are trying to, they're trying to destroy this country, and you push that message consistently over time, and eventually you've got the situation where there's kind of almost a Pavlovian response to the word atheist, where it's like, atheist, well, that's bad, I've heard that. And I think that in addition to pointing out what's wrong with your opponent's position, in a lot of cases it's also a good idea to, attach it to a label like fundamentalist or extremist, or, well, this is just like that guy who, well, this is just like when terrorists flew planes into buildings or something like that.
Yeah. I think there's also a different mechanism that's working through, and not I say different. It's there's some some things that work whenever you're the majority and things that work when you're the minority, and
Right.
there's a lot of overlap, but there is some interesting differences. And one is that it's called normative influence whenever the majority is pushing their. Okay, I didn't know how familiar with it is, but then the other side is called informational influence because you change people's mind based on the ideas. It's just harder and it takes more time, but
Right.
and more effort, unfortunately, for the informational influence. But I think that would be really helpful to. I guess we do already do the
Well,
things
even
you're saying.
Neil deGrasse Tyson's New Cosmos, like if you'll watch that, he's throwing facts at you. He's using logic, but he's using beauty. He's using music. He's using all those things that when you watch religious videos about like the Passion of the Christ, like all those things that swell up your emotions and make you feel like the spirit. You feel spiritual watching that, so you can use both.
Not only that, when you watch Cosmos, there's also a narrative to every episode. There's those little cartoon bits, and the cartoon bits usually have some kind of villain, if you've noticed. I mean, they're not extreme caricatures of a villain, but there are like particular people who tried to hold the good scientists down. And that is very much one of those emotional tricks. Like, it's not really necessary to present the truth of a scientific idea, but it gets the audience emotionally engaged in the subject that they're talking about. It's like, ooh, I sure hope that Galileo beats that rotten church.
Yeah, like, oh, he was right the whole time. Oh, I should be more sympathetic to his view.
That's interesting.
I think people need that kind of story arc to be.
We're storytelling creatures. That's how we frame things. Like, we need a narrative.
We've been. That's actually something my lab looks at, and that's something I'm looking at towards my dissertation. Is to talk about like how to get science, who's very. We communicate totally differently to one another than we. Or right now, we don't actually. We communicate to the public like we do each other, and then we were like, we don't need to do that. We need to. Would it still be ethical if we? Use psychological principles that we know work, like these, narratives and things like that, or would it be kind of like a, I don't know, dirty, underhanded? Is it worthwhile for a scientist to wear a fuzzy sweater, or should we keep the lab coats? It's
do you want to be Varys or do you want to be Ned?
Yeah, yeah, but although I think how you dress is a very minimal part of how you're perceived compared to the way you talk, because like you look at Matt Smith as Doctor Who going, repeatedly going, hey, I wear bow ties. Bow ties are cool. Look, I'm wearing a fez. That's cool. And he says it so often and with so much confidence that you start to believe, oh yeah, bow ties are cool. Pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was obviously using a metaphor there, but we've looked at that as well. I know someone in my lab looked at like whether a psychologist wore a lab coat versus a sweater or like a regular shirt to determine whether people perceived them or how they felt about them, and then how they responded to therapy, because it's a weird thing. But the same thing in atheism, like you may have come about your conclusions by logic, some people do, but and many might have come through some emotional appeal or just disgust by some action of a Christian. But it's funny that a lot of us are really sticking to our guns for logic, trying to change people's minds whenever that person. Yeah, I've been thinking about tactics of spreading ideas, dissemination of information or ideas or beliefs through some other modality, something that works better. It's just not real clear yet.
Let me ask you this. What are some stereotypes of atheists that you can think of? Like, if I was to ask David's relatives who are at church right now, tell me what atheists are like. What would they likely say?
Angry.
Okay. What else?
Smug.
Arrogant.
Yeah, right. And I mean, I think they're sort of overly logical and too reliant on well, you should let go of your logic and you should just accept faith, because where else is the beauty of life coming from? That sort of thing.
Yeah, it's like when Oprah Winfrey said that the swimmer could not be an atheist because she found awe in things. She's like, well, then you're not an atheist, because in her mind, atheists cannot feel awe. They don't have emotional ability to feel awe.
So, I mean, thinking about those stereotypes and where we're coming from, I think a lot of what's important about presentation, or like going back to what you said, if you're a scientist and you're thinking, well, people have these stereotypes of scientists and it's not working what we're doing, so let's do something else. I feel like you almost have to actively set out to subvert the stereotypes. So, like, for instance, if atheists are humorless and overly logical, the most important thing you can do with a presentation, I think, is be funny.
That's why JT wears those stupid hats at his talks.
Sure, yeah, that's a start. And do not, like, whenever I'm writing a speech, I definitely make several passes about it and look at the language I'm using and be like, I have a lot of 4-syllable words in this paragraph. What kind of language can I use that's simpler and more to the point? And one of the things that I'm always really careful to do, if I can help it, is do not mention fallacies by name. Like, or if I do, then mention them in a joking way. But like, I've heard other people on the Atheist Experience say, well, that's just an argument from ignorance. And that makes the other person act defensive and be like, did you just call me ignorant? Because in the first place, they don't know what an argument from ignorance is, really, which proves the point. But
but nobody feels good when you say the word fallacy. You're like, well, I'm not a fallacy. I don't know what that means, but it sounds pretty mean.
Right. But if you can describe a fallacy in a few sentences and be like, use analogies a lot and say that, well, we just put a whole bunch of stuff in terms of Game of Thrones. And so any Game of Thrones any Game of Thrones fan who heard us say, put the discussion about who's more evil, Littlefinger or Tywin Lannister, will immediately have a frame of reference to get grounded to. So I think in a lot of cases, it's just figuring out where your audience's headspace is, and saying things in those terms and much less formal terms. So, like, if you were speaking to an audience full of Christians, you might talk to them in terms of, let's say, empathy and compassion, which are things, whether or not they actually put these into practice, they're things that they like to pride themselves on thinking they have.
Shots fired.
Or the word grace. Like, I've learned that grace to them doesn't mean like a divine transformative influence necessarily. They just use it to mean like charity or compassion or goodness. So you can use words like, we can have grace towards each other without a God, and they'll understand what you're meaning, even though it's basically like a paradox. You can't have grace without God. It's a divine asset.
Yeah. So, I mean, speak their language, like figuring out where your audience is coming from, even if it's something as simple as, oh, I told a joke here and they didn't laugh, so that is not working. I'll write it out next time, or I'll figure out if it's just a problem with this audience. Like, I know some comedians, and I feel like that's the same thing they do. If the goal is to maximize your laughs, you can't complain, oh, this audience is stupid because they didn't laugh at my jokes. You have to think, no, I deployed that joke and it didn't work, so that's my problem. I'm the only one who can win or lose this game.
That is always right. That's like
maybe that church isn't the right audience for your stigmata handjob jokes. Maybe you should drop that one for this presentation.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, cool. We are coming up on time. I don't want to keep you any longer than we asked you, but
so fast.
Yeah, I know, right? I like this. I've been flirting with this idea of like more free-form conversations. I listen to a podcast where they do that, and if you've got intelligent people, I don't want to stroke your ego too much, but you've got smart people, the conversation can take on a life of its own. I think it's really interesting. So,
yeah.
But also flies by.
Right. Well, I mean, we can keep going or stop, whatever works for you guys.
Well, we can call it quits, and then we can always bring you on again later on some other future episode if everybody gives good feedback, and which I'm sure they will.
Yeah.
But yeah, we enjoyed having you on. And do you have any you want to pimp yourself? I know you got a Twitter, and then you got your Twitch page, which you mentioned.
I mean, people can just Google me and follow what they're interested in. Russell Glasser. But if you are in the St. Louis area and you are in any way in a position to come to the Gateway for Reason conference, I would love to see you there. I'm going to be going on at 3 p.m. on a Friday, so it's going to require people to actually be dedicated to coming to this conference. But also, Matt Dillahunty is going to be there, JT Eberhard, Atheist of the Year, Vicky Garrison is going to be there. It's going to be a fun time.
Sounds like a party.
Great. So if you're in the St. Louis area, you know what you're doing on Friday at 3 p.m. Is it this Friday?
No, sorry. It is Friday, July 31st. It is a week from this Friday. Oh, okay. Wow, that's coming up fast.
July 31st. Nice.
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed the conversation. I legitimately did. That was awesome. And it was great to talk to you. So hopefully we can get in some Heroes games and soon, and I won't be late to the party.
Great. See you guys.
Bye. See you later.